everyone. I'm Michelle Snyder. I'm one of the consultants here at the Center for Healthy Churches. I lead our nonprofit arm, which is called CHC-PneuMatrix, and I'm also team lead for our organizational development work. What organizational development means is pretty much helping churches be their best in all kinds of ways. We're glad you've joined us for this series that we're calling the Future Ready Church. In this series, we've been taking a deep dive into what it looks like for a church to tackle some of these strategic questions that help them be the church that's needed for the world today. So, with me, I have several of my colleagues that I'm excited to have this conversation with. They're experts at what we're talking about, which today's episode is when the real issue is conflict. Um, we've all, at least those of us on this call, have all been in situations where we get a call and a church says, I'd like to do visioning work. And then we get into the job and we realize, oh, wait, there's more here than we realized. And some of it is conflict. So we decided to devote an entire episode to it, which I think is going to be a really robust conversation. To have this conversation today, we have with us Dr. David Brubaker. David is one of our newer consultants, but he is definitely not new to consulting around conflict. In fact, David might be the leading voice in church consulting spaces on conflict. He's literally written the book or several books. His books are called When the Church Does Not Hold, Leading in an Age of Polarization. And then he's also written a book called Promise and Peril, Understanding and Managing Change and Conflict in Congregations, as well as some other books and a dissertation, as I understand. So David's also the recently retired Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Professions at Eastern Mennonite University. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
We have Kyle Reese with us from, are you in Florida or Georgia
I'm
now,
in
Kyle?
Savannah.
Georgia, okay.
We live
Oh,
between both places.
oh, do you? Oh, okay. So right now you're sitting in Georgia.
I am.
Either one is sunnier than where I am in Western Pennsylvania. I will say that. Um, Kyle has pastored churches, currently pastoring a church in Savannah, Georgia. He's been on numerous boards. He has been the executive director of a nonprofit. He's been moderator of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. He's also successfully parented three children into adulthood. So all of those give Kyle credibility and expertise on our topic today, which is conflict. And then finally, we have Joel Snyder. Joel is actually team lead for our conflict transformation team. And he's really good at it. I know that because he's actually helped to navigate some personal conflicts that I've been in. And I can tell you that Joel's calm demeanor and sage-like listening bring deep calm to storms. So Joel's been a pastor for 40 years, the last 21 of those being in Rome, Georgia. And I'm always thrilled when he's willing to be a part of these conversations. So, with that, let's get this conversation about conflict started. So, sometimes when we get calls for visioning work, like I said, or strategic planning or anything like that, we start talking to them, but the more questions we ask, the more we learn that the real issue that the church is dealing with is conflict in some form. So David, as the sort of expert on this matter, can you talk to us a bit about what's going on here? And if visioning work is ever the right answer in conflict situations.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and my colleagues Kyle and Joel. Great to be with all three of you. So, I would say about a third of the referrals that I receive are explicit requests for strategic planning or visioning. And about a third are requests for structure review processes or looking at decision making, some aspect of the structure of the congregation or organization. And a third are in a variety of other categories, including very specific requests for help with conflict or succession planning or other kind of things that congregations are working with. But of those third that are explicit requests for strategic planning or visioning, I would guess that about half have been a proxy for we have conflict and we don't know what to do, so let's do strategic planning.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad instinct. It I think is rooted in the assumption that there are probably differing visions for the future of the congregation or differing understandings of the present, and that those need to be reconciled in some way. So I don't dismiss the request for strategic planning out of hand, but I do ask to meet with decision makers to talk about what is really happening and how we can respond to it most appropriately. And I always say we're going to start with listening. So we don't start with planning, we start with listening, and the listening will generally uncover those deeper issues that might be there around which there is conflict.
Hmm. So that's interesting. I mean, in some ways, what you're saying is that if the conflict is around conflicting ideas about the vision, then engaging in a visioning process is their way of saying, let's tackle this question. Let's sort of lean in and ask ourselves, maybe which of us is right? Maybe how do we reconcile the two? Maybe how do we have the hard conversations in a safer way? But that all of those are legitimate.
Yes, and maybe it's a way of saying we have trouble naming that we have conflict, but we are able to say, let's do strategic planning because that might address the conflict that we have trouble talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting. One of our previous episodes, we were talking about like sort of where do you get started? How do you do an assessment of what your starting points are? And one of our panelists said, sort of what God's up to in the world is what God has always been up to in the world. It's pretty easy. God's about the business of liberation and redemption and healing. And so we're not making this up. We're not starting from zero, and it's a pretty simple answer. When you just said what you said, I thought like whether it's conflict, whether it's visioning, what we do is start with listening. And that's actually pretty elementary. That's easy. Like, I mean, it's incredibly hard, but it's also easy. Um, and it's the starting point no matter what we're talking about.
And we start with listening for two reasons. One, obviously, so we can begin to understand what the real issues are that the congregation is dealing with. And the second is listening gives us the ability to make change. Listening is the prerequisite for any kind of significant intervention in a congregation. It's how we earn the right to make change working with others in the congregation.
Okay. One more thing for you, David. One of my favorite things to listen to you talk about is your dissertation work about an external focus. And it
Mhm.
strikes me that this conversation also is visioning ever the right answer to resolving conflict. Seems like your doctoral work leads to this too.
Yeah, so you're referring to the finding that there was only one variable, one change variable that had a negative effect on conflict, which means it made conflict less likely. And that was when I asked congregational leaders if they had in the last 5 years started any kind of community outreach from their congregation. So if there was an external focus of some sort, it was the only change variable that made conflict somewhat less likely. Most change variables had no effect on conflict. Not all change causes conflict. The two that did have a positive effect on conflict were if they changed their worship service or if they changed their decision-making structure. And that's not surprising because worship is about meaning and meaning making, so it's very important. And structure is about how we allocate power, and power is very important. So those two things were not surprising findings. What did surprise me was that starting some kind of community connection, outreach, engagement made conflict less likely.
Yeah. So, and visioning work can do that for us. So
Mhm.
the point of this is if that can help, sometimes helping them pick their eyes up and look out can be an antidote to some things. That feels promising to me. Okay, so when this happens, when people call, when churches call, when pastors call for visioning work, and it's really conflict, or some element of what's going on is conflict. What are some of the common things that you see that are keeping churches stuck, where they're trying to plan their way out of conflict? What are some of the places we see that happen most often? Joel, do you have an answer for that?
Well, one of the things that I've experienced is that they're stuck because, and David actually referred to this earlier, but they don't want to name what it really is. So they would rather talk about many different things. And until you actually name what is at least precipitating the conflict in the moment, yeah, I mean, it's like trying to go to a doctor and be cured of something without diagnosing it accurately. I mean, you just,
Mm.
I feel bad, make me feel better. Uh, you, you, you'll have to know what it is.
Okay.
And naming, I'll just say, naming it produces a lot of anxiety for some people.
Yeah. Yep. Kyle, what would you say?
I think one thing that I've experienced is trying to differentiate or how the conflict arose. And many times what I've experienced in congregations is that it was baked in the cake years before a lot of the present folks even showed up on the scene. And so if that is the case, um, people have participated in it, but there is some sense of, okay, I didn't create this, so how do we move forward together? So I find that helpful to look where the conflict really began.
I had a friend say once that if you're looking for that kind of thing, you got to go all the way back to Eden. If we just try to peel that onion, it'll go all the way back to Eden. Yeah, because some of that, I mean, Kyle, when you say it, what strikes me is like some of those stories are ancient. Some of, it's the Hatfields and the McCoys. Like our families have been fighting since, yeah, trying to get to core, like to the core and to the roots and to the starting points. That can be really complicated.
I worked with the congregation and we started with timeline work.
Mhm.
And they were Presbyterian, but their founding story was they were in a beach community and they had a Methodist, an Episcopalian, and a Presbyterian come preach for 3 Sundays. And they thought the Presbyterian was the best. And so that's how they became Presbyterian. Fast forward 75 years later, they're having all sorts of conflict about the presbytery coming in and helping them do a pastor search.
Wow. Well, as the token Presbyterian, I'm not offended by the sentiment that the Presbyterians got it right. But yeah, I hear you. I hear you. You can trace that right through the DNA thread. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like just Jesus, was it Matthew 19 or Matthew
18.
Matthew 18. Okay. If your brother offends you, go to your brother, right? If your sister offends you, go to your sister. Seems like that's easier than going through an entire congregational visioning process. Sort of a singular conversation could save a year's worth of work and thousands of dollars. What are churches so afraid of when it comes to confronting these conflicts head on? Joel, you're the one that named this, right? What is it?
Well, and I think in David and Kyle's previous answers, we have some of this, and that is it's rarely as simple as just Michelle, you and I are at odds, or we disagree about worship or whatever it may be. It has been expressed in many other forms. I had one church leader say, "Well, we've just institutionalized dysfunction." And I thought, yes, that's pretty clear. But then they still had a very difficult time trying to address it. And when it's that deep and that broad, so that it's now included people across a generation or multiple generations, it's not as simple as just you and I can work it out. That would be great. And maybe that's a beginning, but it's rarely a simple solution like that.
It strikes me that even when you say it's rarely that simple, it strikes me that probably they're not even clear about what all the conflict is. Like it's
Yes.
one thing to say we'd rather do visioning work because we can't agree on our vision, and another to say this is a mess. Like I don't even the most articulate I can be is that this is a mess.
Yeah. And I'll also add that conflict, when it erupts, often has a person or two that are critical to it. And those people often have great sway, and nobody wants to name this person has done so and so, or this person controls, or this person has veto power over everything. I'd love to hear what David and Kyle have to say about this, but it is very painful to name a person
Mm.
when they are at the center of something like this.
Wow. I'd also be curious to hear David and Kyle say whether they think that's a common, like if like what percentage of this comes down to our discomfort holding people accountable, individuals accountable. Like is that a rarity or is that a commonality? Yeah. Kyle, what's on the table is Joel's question about what you think and also my question, what makes this so hard? Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that the gospel gives us a means by which we are called to share life together, but there aren't really many good examples of people overcoming conflict. Wherever in the culture, in the church, anywhere. And so it's much easier to fracture than it is to work through things, I think. But when Joel was talking, I mean, how many of us have gone in to a church to do visioning or conflict work or whatever, and the phrase "a small group of people" fill in the blank. I mean, that's true.
Yeah, interesting. Are you saying there's not good biblical examples of
I
people
think there are
affected?
good biblical examples. I don't think we are, charged with transforming culture, but we are products of our culture. And I'm not sure our folks have good models of conflict resolution in the culture at large.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, got it. That's an interesting reflection. Yeah. David, what do you think?
So Matthew 18:15-20 actually gives us a three-stage model for responding to conflict. And it's based on negotiation, mediation, arbitration. So if we take all the steps that Jesus laid out, if your brother or sister sins against you, offends you, go to them and show them their fault just between the two of you. That is negotiation. It basically means if Joel and I had an issue, I should take the initiative to go to Joel and have a private conversation with him, and most likely we would work it out. But if not, it says if your brother fails to listen to you. So, stretching the example, if Joel failed to listen to me, then I should take one or two others along. Then there should be one or two others to help us mediate that conversation. And this is a very clear biblical instruction. And often, when two people are stuck with each other, the mere presence of a less involved third party can be very helpful. And
Mhm.
so, interpersonal mediation is an appropriate response. And then Jesus adds this very interesting third step. If that doesn't work, then tell it to the church, which I can't imagine means standing up on a Sunday morning and airing my grievances against Joel. That would be grossly inappropriate. But I think it does mean that if mediation doesn't work, and it works 80% of the time, but if it doesn't work, then
Mhm.
arbitration could be an appropriate response. And there might be church elders or others that we could each share with our particular concern or grievance or harm that has occurred and get less involved third party arbitrators to say, this is what we think makes sense for the two of you to continue to stay in relationship with each other and resolve this. I wish we followed those three steps. And the one that we most often fail to follow is go to your brother privately. So instead of going to Joel, I'll talk to Kyle about Joel. And that starts the polarization process. That starts the process of forming subgroups in the church. So by the time we're invited in, it's usually a level 3 or 4 conflict on the 5 levels that Speed Leaves gave us. And people are already forming factions because of multiple failures to go directly to the other sister or brother.
So again, David, why? What makes that hard? Like,
We have trouble having hard conversations. I would say this after 44 years of marriage. My wife and I still have to make time and space to have hard conversations. And it doesn't come naturally or easily to most of us. What comes naturally to most of us is avoidance. So I'll just avoid the person that I have tension with because that makes me feel better. I don't have to see them or deal with them.
yeah.
But that's not the Jesus way.
And it takes some trust. I mean, when you talk about
Mm.
44 years of marriage, I wonder sometimes if we have a deficit of trust in the church that I don't know, that I'll be heard or that I'll be safe or whatever. Yeah. Um yeah, so I'm thinking about a situation that I worked with a church, started as visioning, ended up being a staff conflict. that there was a real difference in vision at the staff level. And it was a difference between the senior leader and like a, 3 stages down the org chart person. And he just needed to own his authority and say, this is the vision for the church. And if you know, ultimately he did let her go. But kind of what I'm thinking about a bit is like our theology, like the ways in which either our theology or our like the enculturation of our theology keeps us stuck because we lean so heavily into grace and forgiveness and turn the other cheek and 70 times 7 that I think that we tell ourselves a story that somehow conflict is antithetical to a follower of Jesus, to a way of being. In my personal life, I'll say to my husband, "I'm mad because you spent too much money." But in our church life, I say, if I say that, then I'm being unforgiving or ungracious or something. And I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about that. I know it wasn't one of the questions I fed you in advance, but if you have any thoughts about how our theology can keep us stuck around some of this.
I love the analogy of covenant, which is what a marriage is. I think one of the things that I've experienced in the Baptist context is we don't have many churches and individuals don't have a covenant understanding of what it means to be a part of a church. And,
Hmm.
and so I think that understanding is the platform by which we can work these things out. But if you look at many times what happens, either we avoid them or someone gets angry and they just go to the next church down the street. And there's no platform or understanding of this life that we share together that binds us to be able to deal with these issues.
Wow. Uh, I mean, it's almost sort of the church adopting sort of a consumerist ethos that makes it easy to opt out of covenant. That's really good, Kyle. Yeah. Joel, we're gonna.
Well, I was just going to say that's the consumer. I mean, so much of what we talk about for churches is marketing. We will meet your needs, and people come with the expectation that you're going to do X, Y, and Z for them. And that probably doesn't include conflict. But if you don't, then in today's culture, used to be people would be members of a church for generations. Now they move or they just, this doesn't meet my needs anymore. I'm in disagreement with this vision. I go, I leave. Leaving is very easy.
Mhm.
I think I would add that it's human nature to want to seek peace and harmony. So we don't go to church seeking conflict. I mean, there are some high conflict personalities, but they're very rare. Most of us are not going to church to seek conflict. So when we encounter it, often our first response is to deny it. But we can't change what we won't name, according to AA. And for what I tell my clients is if you have any doubt about conflict in the early church, read the book of Acts. And for that matter, any of Paul's letters to these various congregations, because they're just full of conflict. And he's addressing it, Paul, the apostle, is addressing it directly. And the story of the growth of the Christian church in Acts is change and conflict and growing in embrace of people who are not the traditional followers of Jesus. And when you do that, there's often resistance and conflict. And it's about how the church dealt with it, including Acts 15 and this amazing council in Jerusalem to decide to admit even Gentiles into this body of believers. So the scriptures can inspire us, but the first thing they'll tell us is let's be honest about conflict.
Hmm. Yeah. So what about what I said? Like, what would you say to a church or a person who says, "I'm supposed to turn the other cheek and forgive and grace trumps all"? Like how would you respond to that pastorally to someone?
I would make a distinction between genuine grace and cheap grace, as Bonhoeffer called it. Cheap grace is turning the other cheek and allowing the other person to continue to misuse their power. That's not at all what Jesus was calling for. Jesus was calling to turn the other cheek as a challenge to the offender. We've misinterpreted that scripture. So, yeah, cheap grace is easy to come by. Real grace is hard work.
Mm.
And if you take the analogy of abuse, people would say, well, you must stay in that relationship even though you're being abused. I don't think that's grace, and I don't think it's very healthy for the abuser to allow them to continue without being confronted. And so if you use that as a paradigm for the church, it's not good to allow, it's not good for the person to allow them to continue to, if they're one of those rare individuals, to do that sort of thing. So I think it's being very Christian to name it, and this is harmful to me, but it's also harmful to the one who's performing the act. They're not modeling Christ. They're not growing in Christ likeness if they continue to act that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I'm a therapist by training. And so and I often found myself saying to clients, I think we pretend to be confused when we don't like our options. And I think in some of these cases, what we're talking about is going to a person, holding them accountable. Like it's not hard stuff. We just don't like that that's the only option. And so instead we divert and deflect and think about, and all the we landed a visioning process. Um, but sometimes it comes down to a pretty simple solution. That's good. That's good. So, do any of you have any examples, any stories, any real life church cases where the church had started a visioning process, had conflict, came through it? I mean, other than Acts 15, which is a pretty good one, actually. But yeah, other examples of churches you've worked with where there's hope on the other side of this?
I want to respond to what David said earlier. While he was talking about that, I couldn't help but think back to my small Baptist college undergraduate experience when in Baptist history we learned the only thing that's big enough to keep Baptists together has been mission. And
Yeah.
and I think that's so true. I worked with a congregation that had conflict, and I'm not sure how much it resolved, but they dealt with the question, who is my neighbor? And they literally drew 3 concentric circles, 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, and they concentrated on mission partnerships in those circles. Again, it didn't magically solve the conflict, but the conflict didn't have the gas that it had prior to that process.
Yeah.
Hmm. Uh, so, Kyle, can I just ask, like, it didn't solve the conflict. The conflict, did it run out of gas? I mean, did it eventually, or was it like people learned to live together with some tension because we're in this, like, what was the outcome of that?
They learned to live together with tension. I
Okay.
mean, I think the formation and the experience was so rooted in that congregation. It was just for them anyway. Okay, this is where we are. Let's focus on this. But it still pops up. I mean, it's still there.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just add that at Center for Healthy Churches, one of the things we talk about is conflict transformation, not just resolution, but transform it. And I think Kyle's example takes a lot of spiritual energy to be in conflict. And if you can channel that energy toward that kind of community outreach, you have transformed the conflict into positive mission for the church.
Yeah.
I think that word is very instructive.
So,
Yeah. And also, we're not talking about polarization here, but that's a word for the world and for our churches to say, like we don't really believe in this broken world of ours that we tie stuff up with neat bows and then we set it on a shelf. Like this is real and this is operative. And in my own life, like I've got relatives I'm never going to agree with politically. Can I have Thanksgiving dinner with them, and how do I go about that? And what I'm hearing you say is they didn't fix it, and maybe they don't have to fix it, and maybe fixing it isn't the goal anyway. But when we turn our eyes outward to participating in what God's up to in the world, we can find ways to stay in relationship that are going to be bumpy and rocky and sometimes complicated and challenging with emerging issues, and living together in unity in whatever way that we can do that. That's good, Kyle. Yeah.
So with Joel's comment about conflict transformation, what I would tell my students as we were teaching conflict transformation is that every conflict is an opportunity for change. Because when we start looking at the conflict itself and the roots of the conflict, it opens up possibilities. An example I would use, I was working with an American Baptist congregation located in the South. So they were already in a little bit of tension with their environment because traditionally that was the group known as the Northern Baptist. But there was conflict over the lead minister. And it was level 4 conflict, and level 4 conflict often is focused on the lead minister. And they were fighting over whether he should stay or he should go. But we took a deeper dive through listening into what was going on in that congregation. And it was really about different views of power and authority, and to what degree power should be shared and authority should be distributed so that decision making could be made at lower levels. That was the underlying issue. The pastor was able to make some changes, some adaptive changes himself. There were some changes made to the bylaws by the team that I was working with, and also to decision-making structure. But most importantly, we worked collaboratively to develop a community covenant, what Kyle was talking about earlier, in which they made commitments to each other about how they would make decisions and how they would communicate and how they would be in community with each other. And 5 years later, when I checked in with them, that was the most significant outcome of the process, was that they were able to change how they had conversations together and made decisions. So conflict is not just danger, it's also opportunity.
Wow, that is a good word. Good word. Well, listeners, I told you that we had some serious expertise on our panel. And so thank you to our panelists for your time today, but also thank you to those who listened and spent some time with us thinking about conflict. We're grateful for the opportunity to think with you about these things. They certainly take up a lot of headspace for us, and it's how we spend our days. But we're doing it in order to help churches participate in God's call in the most effective way that they possibly can. We hope that you've heard some things that have been helpful, some good advice or some insights. We really love it. We don't love it when churches have conflict, but if you do have conflict, we love it when you call us and ask us to journey with you through it. We've got some folks on our team. We've got some consultants who are really good at what they do, who are deep wells of expertise, as you've heard. And if we can be of assistance in any way as you navigate these complex spaces that are opportunities for growth and transformation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through our website at churches.org. Peace to you as you join us.